we're going to have a panel. I'm going to invite Stephen Lee from DECA Games to come up and introduce his guests. He has an amazing array of people, but if I won't try and jumpstart things, I'll let him come on board. The plot is to talk about when is the right time to start thinking and testing and delivering. Live ops. Wow, you got a few things to cover there, Stephen. You're on mute still, sir.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this is a topic that definitely can be, we can talk about all day.
If only we had the whole day to talk about it. Oh, wait. I'll leave it to you, sir.
All right. Thanks, Oscar. Great. So now everyone is coming in.
We're all here.
Is that everyone? Yes.
Even Patrick.
Success.
Just waiting for video. There we are.
There we go. Okay, awesome. Great. Well, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to this panel. It is a great pleasure to be moderating such an esteemed and experienced, high-powered group of people. If we were to kind of pick people in the industry to talk about live ops, I would find a hard time identifying many more people than what we already have assembled right here. So you're in for a big treat. So what I'd like to do before we get started, in case some of the audience are not familiar, let's just go around and introduce ourselves. So please tell us who you are, where you are, what you do, and how about to also tell us the last game that really hooked you, or maybe the last game that you spent money on. I will actually start myself to give you guys a second to think about it. So I'm Stephen Lee, based here in Berlin, Germany for DECA Games. We like to refer to ourselves as a live ops publisher. So we help developers and teams to take over operations of their existing live games. And in some cases, we acquire those games. And that gives developers more flexibility to move and focus on newer projects. Who would like to go next? Feel free to chime in.
Shall I start? I'm Mark Robinson, founder of Delta DNA 9 years ago, I think it is, and counting. 9 months ago, we joined the Unity family, so I'm GM of Delta DNA within Unity, and it's been a great experience for us all. Based in sunny Edinburgh, one of the ironies about lockdown, I was telling my colleagues on the panel, is that the weather has been blisteringly hot in Scotland, which is totally unusual. Because of lockdown, my pals and I haven't been on the golf course, so we've been playing Golf Clash. So we've been unlocking the Golf Clash clans and getting competitive with other people around the world, which has been a really fun experience. So that's me.
I'll jump in. So hi, I'm James Gwertzman. I'm dialing in today from Seattle. I've been in the game industry for about 20 years. My last studio experience doing live ops was over in China, where I was actually running a studio doing free-to-play versions of PopCap games, including Plants vs. Zombies, in sort of the early days of smartphone mobile. But then I started a company called PlayFab, which is doing sort of back-end services pretty broadly for gaming. And we were acquired by Microsoft about 2.5 years ago. So I've most recently been the general manager of PlayFab at Microsoft. And I'm actually just now starting to look actually even a little bit more broadly into sort of the broader cloud services for gaming at Microsoft, including Azure and other things, and what that might look like. So, stay tuned. That'll be kind of fun. In terms of gaming, actually, I have 3 kids. One of them is a 7-year-old, and she's been playing a lot of Roblox recently. So I've actually been doing a lot of Roblox, exploration with her. For those of you who aren't familiar, Roblox is becoming this game platform with a whole bunch of interesting live ops happening inside of the games, inside of Roblox. And so all the techniques we know and love for mobile games and PC games are being adapted now inside the Roblox platform. And it's kind of fascinating to see these early, often very young developers starting to adapt the same techniques that we follow professionally. So that's fun.
Cool. I will join in next. So hey, I'm Nick. I'm also based in Berlin. I've been working in live ops and product for about 11 years now. And I'm currently a freelance consultant focused exactly on those areas. So I work with a lot of different companies to help improve their KPIs, particularly retention, monetization. And in terms of what I'm playing recently, I still can't quite prize myself away from Marvel Strike Force. Yeah, too much progression everywhere. I keep upgrading stuff. It's an ongoing struggle.
I can go next. Oh, sorry. All right. I'm Saumya. I'm dialing in from Bangalore, India. I've been a producer for live ops mobile titles for about 4.5 years now. So I feel like on this panel of legendaries, I'm like a magic art. So I've worked at EA Mobile and GSN Games and JumpStart. But actually, I started off in the industry a lot longer. I started as a community manager for like a hardcore PC MMORPG back in the days when social media didn't exist. And when, live ops consisted of us going into the game with our own accounts, with our own characters, and, manually running events, so spawning boss monsters in the game or holding tournaments and, tallying up the scores ourselves and updating the forums. Remember forums? So yeah, it's been quite an evolution since then. And as for what game I'm playing right now, I've not been playing a mobile game recently. I've been playing a lot of Subnautica Below Zero. It's still in early access, but it's been really zen, sort of cruising around the bottom of the ocean and exploring all these ecosystems. So yeah, that's me.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm Patrick McGrath from sunny Berlin. I'm actually surprised there's so many people from Berlin here. I'm currently product lead of June's Journey, top hidden object game in the world. Very proud. Yeah, I have a probably 10-ish years background in live ops. Got my first start at NCSoft when MMOs were going to more live ops structure and they were doing the free to play, and worked at studios and companies like Z2, PopCap, Natural Motion, and now Wooga. So, on some of the bigger titles that they've had, and lots of experience, and yeah, excited to be here.
Great, thanks everyone. So with that, let's get started with kind of the meat and bones of the content. So let's start with kind of the title of this panel. So when is the right time to start thinking, testing, and delivering live ops? Does anyone have something that jumps out at you in terms of timing?
Certainly the thinking portion.
Yeah, yesterday. The answer is yesterday. You should have thought about it last week and implemented it yesterday. So yeah.
Although I'd also add in, it's also never too late. So, absolutely the earlier is better, but never too late. We've seen a lot of games that are, maybe they think they're doing live ops, but they're really just doing very occasional updates or something, and they're on a slow glide path to kind of irrelevance. And then they start to accelerate events, they start to do more engagement, they start to pick up the pace, and you can see those curves just turn right around. So it's never too late, although it's certainly better to start earlier.
It's fascinating how, we've all sort of reoriented our thinking from the sort of the launch and crash that, especially when Delta DNA started, we were trying to save a lot of flawed games. Now these games last for years. And that's really notable that you have to really adopt long-term thinking and long-term strategies for games, because genuinely the engagement with players can last for such a long period. The lifetime value can be eked out over accumulation of experiences over a long time. I think that's the fascinating thing that we're trying to reorientate our thinking around right now.
Yeah, I think as James said, actually, a lot of it is about like kind of just getting in front of it, being early, because like honestly, once you start running live ops, running a live game, suddenly it's like you're in a game of Space Team or Lovers in a Dangerous Space Time. If you've played those, like you're constantly spinning plates in 5 different directions, and you're usually struggling for tools and resources and to make sure that you are getting ahead of your planning. So the sooner you can like think about building tools or automating some of those systems, like you put yourself at a massive advantage.
Yeah, I would add that it just adds to the probability of success, especially this day and age. It's hard to succeed against, this CPI LTV battle that we're all facing. And if you don't have proper live ops in early, and I mean, this is a portion of it, like when do you start testing it? Well, ideally in soft launch, which means that you had to think about it earlier than that. So yeah, I really think fundamentally to give your game the best chance. But to James's point, for sure, it's never too late.
Nick makes a really good, I think, an interesting point as well about automation, because you really need to free up thinking time to plan ahead. So you can't keep repeating the same things that you've already figured out, whether that's campaigns or events or promotions or whatever. You've got to have a really strong sort of automation element to live ops so that you can just get on with the new thing, the new stuff, the new thinking. That's critical for unlocking the value, I think.
But it's automation with the ability to change a bunch of variables at the same time to keep things fresh, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the biggest challenges I found in live ops is people have come to me in the past and said, okay, we want you to start running live ops on our game. I'm like, okay, where's the economy depth? Where, like, what can I sell? What can I actually use to incentivize players to take part? Because sometimes you can have an event that's just fun, but a lot of the time you need to build that up with like progression and rewards and other things that players actually want. So like actually having the economy ready behind it is also really, really crucial.
Yeah. One thing I'm going to add, one thing I'd love to add is something we've seen, which is to really start to understand how to roll live ops out in a game is a huge culture shift for studios that are not used to it. So it's a completely different mindset. And so we, you know, my colleague Kristen, who's actually just speaking, she said it takes, in her experience, 5 or 6 years for a studio that's traditional to sort of package goods or you know, kind of old school to really adapt the new mindset. And so given that this is a very long journey, not in terms of the game technology, but your own mindset, you know, just getting something out there and then starting to learn, and because it will change your mindset. You know, if you're designing a game with the live ops sort of mentality from the beginning, you will design it very differently than if you don't have that. And so, you know, yes, it's good to start earlier, but you know, a lot of it also has to do with just that changing culture shift, and you can't rush that. It really is not something you can flip the switch and expect every designer on your entire team or every producer on your team overnight to sort of get it. It's a very different shift.
Yeah, I think that's. Sorry,
one of the things I would add is the evolution of what live ops even means has assisted the cultural shifts. I mean, I remember back in the day, there was still conversations of premium versus free to play. That was 8 years ago, 7 years ago at some places. So yeah, you definitely go from a studio that's having these types of debates to even start you know, respecting free to play. And certainly some of the larger titles that Supercell put out have helped the industry kind of realize the potential of free to play and what live ops does in that business model. And so it is that cultural shift, but the evolution of the market itself has really assisted in, oh, this is viable, and you know, players actually like it more, or at least I should say some.
And live ops is quite a confused term, I think. I mean, it's a bit of a catch-all, but I think it, you know, at its essence, what I think of it is it boils down to attaching individual players to the right content. You know, and that's a complex formula. You've got different playing styles, you've got different sort of levels of competency, different archetypes in your player base. If you're thinking ahead, like we all encourage people to do, then you should have lots of content to deploy. We've moved far past the sort of the concept, the basic concepts of timed promotions, you know, Halloween offers, holiday offers. And we're seeing some real sophistication now where, you know, campaigns are very precisely targeted to players based on their playing style. And that's where the industry's going as we see it, that, you know, the sophistication is really ramping up because, you know, the thinking is there, the culture is there for the studios that have adopted this approach. And the tool sets are there as well to hopefully deliver the personalized experiences.
Cool. So we've successfully answered the title of the panel. So thank you everyone for coming. I'm just kidding. So let's kind of dive in a little bit more and help developers kind of through the development process. So, you know, you've all pointed out correctly that the earlier you think about live ops is better. So let's talk about pre-launch. What are you guys seeing or doing with your partners or within your companies to prepare for effective live ops? Feel free to throw in tactics, examples, what has worked really well for you guys from your experience.
I guess I approach things from a more like economy driven angle. And definitely one of the things that I try to do before like launching live ops on any title would be, like I mentioned earlier, ensuring that you have enough kind of depth of economy so that you have enough items that you can distribute, but also making sure to as great a degree as possible that those currencies and items feel balanced against one another. I feel like this is a step which is often quite overlooked, and a lot of the time when people design an economy in the first place, they kind of put placeholder numbers and then often forget to come back and change them. And only when playtesting realize, oh, well, we should have updated that. But actually, again, it's one of those things, if you can get it done before launch and actually have your currencies balanced, then your live ops are inevitably going to be more successful because you're actually going to be offering value for money instead of overpriced content.
Right. Patrick, you also mentioned something about testing before, right? I'd love for you to elaborate on that if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So even before going into soft launch, just evaluating your feature set, making sure that the motivational loops are there, understanding what you want your players to be motivated by, and this like very tightly goes with the economy. You know, making sure that the reward space is there, and also the value proposition is well understood, right? Because you can have some currency or some reward that economically is valuable, but the players don't like it. And so these are the types of things that you want to go into soft launch testing, as well as basic frameworks. So if you have a sales framework, you have an events framework, you should certainly have CRM, so like messaging within the game. And going into soft launch, you want to have, you know, variations and different balances, different types of these events. Of course, I'm not saying, hey, you should have 3 event types, but there's easy ways to have a variation, like reskin, some very low cost options that you can have, just to see how players are engaging, see how players are, you know, monetizing around these things, how they're progressing, and yeah, this really will set you up for success if you can come into soft launch with this planned out, and you know, you have this hypothesis-driven attitude towards this feature set.
We see quite a switch of gears going from soft launch to full launch. I think, you know, we have seen our clients, and we see experience where the numbers can change once you've done the full rollout. Depends on the geo that you're doing, and you're doing, you know, you're targeting your soft launch at. So there's a lot of, as Patrick was saying, there's a lot of opportunity pre-launch to do game experimentation, level balancing, economy balancing, all of those fundamentals, and getting them right, because that's actually where the lifetime value comes from, fundamentally. But as we move through to proper launch, then you're actually needing to very quickly validate some of your assumptions around lifetime value. You're looking at your ad placement strategy. You know, a lot of the change in dynamic is seeing ads as a retention mechanic now, whereas before we'd probably all agree that ads were a churn problem. Actually getting the data to show the appetite for ads for different player types versus the consumption of ads, that's an important mechanic to get right. But it needs to be tested out in the real live world, because we do see behaviors changing from soft launch to launch reasonably dramatically, and you need to be able to reorientate things quite quickly to take advantage of the full launch data that's coming through.
It sounds like testing is a huge component that you know, you guys are you know, pretty integral for your process. Are there key numbers that you're looking at whereby you see, if you see this happening in a soft launch, that gives you the confidence to move forward? What are some markers or flags that developers should keep an eye out when they're prior to launch?
I think this is something that from genre to genre dramatically changes. Like, you know, you look at some of these games and they only care about up to day 7 retention. And so really it's just, okay, what is day 1 retention and the engagement? Like, how many minutes did they play in the game? Where at Wooga, I mean, we really want to understand long-term retention? Do we actually have something here that has a long-term business case? So we're certainly looking at retention, then probably engagement within, okay, what are the players doing? Where are the pain points in the economy? And monetization, of course, like we all run businesses. We need to get paid. So I would say probably in that order in soft launch, at least from my standpoint, in being a casual game that has, we're looking at 1 to 2 year LTVs to justify our CPIs. But again, like genre to genre, this can change dramatically.
But not just casual games. I mean, I think that's a good point. Even though I would say, in some ways, the more hardcore the game is, both the higher the potential LTV can be, but also the less important it is to focus on that up front. I mean, the more important it is to get the engagement and retention dialed in first. Because you look at a game like Riot Games. I spent a lot of time talking with my friends over at Riot, and monetization is such a distant thought for them. With League of Legends especially, it was 100% engagement for a very long time, and that really is even now probably the most important KPI for them, because it's all about the engagement, trusting that with a community, a very active community of players, monetization will follow.
Excellent. How about in terms of, once the game has already launched, you guys are trying to understand how the game is doing and keep a pulse. What are some important factors that you guys keep in mind when you're considering live ops for either your games or the games of your clients and partners?
Well, the good news is that the actual metrics can continue to improve. This is a journey, and you can continue to refine the game. None of us sit back at launch anymore and just wait for the money to come. That doesn't happen. What you have to do is actually double your efforts and refine and A/B test and automate, but really understand the player experiences and how they're changing through time. You're thinking ahead in terms of content and matching the content to those players, because we're really seeing the impact of a lot of accumulative events here. It's not one magic bullet will solve your retention. It's a lot of accumulative events, and that just takes time and effort and constant attention. But if you do take that philosophy, and it's back to James's point about culture, if that philosophy is in the business and how the game's built and managed, then these KPIs continue to improve, and you can be on top of that curve.
I'll speak on, I know Mark, sits at Delta DNA, and I think analytics and understanding your players is so important, because the part of that culture shift we was talking about earlier, it's not just the idea that, okay, I'm in for a marathon now, I'm going to be continually operating this game kind of day in, day out forever. It's more about the role of the player in your design process. It's, I think a lot of games early on, just as we were waiting in the green room coming in, my colleague Kristen was talking about, it's like running a nightclub as opposed to being a movie director. And I think that idea of chief designer as nightclub impresario is so critical, because you really are creating an environment for players to have a great time and be really, meet other players and have a really, engaging experience. And so when you take that mindset, the designer, it's almost like the player is sitting at the design table with you alongside you. You're on the same side of the table. You're no longer across the table saying, here's this experience I'm going to build and give to you, the player. You really are, learning what the players are doing and the behavior. And oftentimes your own, understanding of your own game as a designer shifts over time, as you start to see, using live events as opportunities to experiment with new gameplay mechanics, opportunities to test out new ideas that you may make for a more fun experience. And as you try these things, being able to see what's working, what's not working, and listening to your community and seeing what the players are reacting to, and then being able to kind of, tweak over time toward that, it is part of the really fun thing about these live games now, is you have these very emergent sort of paths that games can follow, where over time it can shift. And that's, I think, part of the most exciting part about this space.
Yeah, I mean, it's really about adopting a mindset of experimentation. I think not being afraid to take risks, but also designing with the goal of tweaking or hitting a certain KPI. And that can be quite difficult, as you mentioned, a mindset shift. entirely. So it's quite interesting in that sense. The kind of I think it's helpful to think of it as a different design challenge as opposed to what we're used to. Instead of saying, as you all mentioned, this is what I think is going to be amazing. Saying this is what I think our players are going to really like, for which they will reward us with X, Y, and Z, engagement and monetization and retention. So yeah, that sort of mindset shift is pretty critical to live ops.
Nick, I know you mentioned you had some thoughts about player community as well.
Yeah, so I feel like community is like they're a really useful resource, definitely, to keep on side. And obviously, Stephen, I'm familiar with like how DECA has rebuilt certain games based around their communities, and turned them into very successful products again. And I think they can be a really brilliant resource. I would say if you're looking to them to provide guidance on what you should do in terms of live ops strategy, that's maybe a little optimistic. They can certainly help validate theories that you might have, but throwing out like random surveys to what kind of event should we run next usually just ends in disaster. But I mean, coming back to a point that Mark mentioned earlier as well about how you need to really try and like separate and target users in different ways and how different users consume content. I mean, you have people, particularly in, let's say, like the mid-core space, you have people coming in who will spend a ton and consume content extremely fast, or ones that will spend a ton and will play once a week. And you have people who'll never spend and grind, and people who never spend and just be a casual player. And all of these require very different approaches, really. So coming up with a kind of an all-encompassing live ops strategy for these groups is not really an option a lot of the time, unless you can effectively segment your audience and deliver interesting rewards to the right players at the right time.
It's interesting on the subject of community. I think it so depends on the kind of game that you have. And I think it sort of spans a spectrum. You have games where player-to-player engagement, I should say, is very strong, like your PvP games and your battle royales. And discussing strategy and forming guilds and stuff is really, really important on the one hand. And on the other, you have games for which that might not really be true. What comes to mind is social casino, for example. If players really into slots, that's not really the most social of activities. You might want to talk about it when you won the jackpot, but you're not really going to talk about it when you lost a lot of coins, for example. So I think it really spans the spectrum. And in terms of investing in your community, I think it makes a lot of sense to do that for the heavily, player-to-player style games where every single player matters. Even if someone is coming in for 5 minutes a day, playing a couple of matches and leaving, that is still, adding to the engagement of other players as well. The players who are your high-value players in terms of monetization and engagement. So it makes sense to sort of invest in community management for the broader community. Whereas for games that are on the other side of the spectrum, they're more single-player experiences. I think it gives you the best ROI, I suppose I could say, if you focus on your high-value players, not just monetarily, but in terms of social influencers, if you have any, or engagement. And it's really, really important. When we say community is key to your game, I mean, that is true. Your players are, of course, the gods almighty, who are the source of all your, they keep the lights on and they provide you with food on your table. But it's important to sort of balance what they are telling you with what you're seeing in the game in terms of metrics and how they're actually engaging. And what I found, over the years is that players may tell you exactly what they want or what they think they want, and they might spell it out in no uncertain terms. But instead of just following exactly that, it's very important to realize that they are expressing a need, and we as designers and game makers can, try to figure out what need they are expressing and give them experiences that fulfill that, rather than exactly what they are telling us, in those exact terms.
Sure. Okay, I'd love to hear from each of you about, if you have an example of a game that you've worked on where that you'd really love to share in which live ops experience was really, really positive, very effective, or perhaps on the flip side, a horror story, a mistake that was made, a lesson learned from live ops. It can be from your own games. It could be shouting out a game in the industry that you think is doing a really good job or a really bad job of live ops. Let's go around the horn, and let's start with James.
On the spot. You know, I've been actually very involved recently with Minecraft within Microsoft, you know, and I don't know if Minecraft is necessarily a title we think of as being especially focused on live ops, but, you know, it's one of the longest kind of enduring communities in the game industry at this point, you know, almost, I think, almost 10 years now, not more. And, you know, it continues to grow, you know, we're like a lot of games with effective live ops, it's a bigger audience today than it was, you know, when, 10 years ago. So, and key to that really has been, one of the things that we've added that has been a big focus is the marketplace, which is an opportunity for players to create content and essentially sell it to other players. And that marketplace has all sorts of challenges with it, because now you're actually, you know, besides the kind of physical complexities of how do you actually arrange for player-to-player payments, there's been a lot of learning around how do you promote that, what sort of events do you run around it, what sort of sales do you run, and so just managing the economy of sort of a marketplace like that has been a whole new level of learning, you know, beyond just what you typically do in gaming. In terms of actual kind of, you know, I love train wreck stories myself. I don't unfortunately have a great one I can share. You know, most of it, because I'm on the PlayFab side, you know, one of my roles is providing a lot of the platform technology that other parts of Microsoft Game Studios and others, of course, use. And so, you know, my train wreck story is typically involved in servers not working or you know, key services going down at a critical moment. And I think the only thing I'll add there is just, you know, in a world where these things are getting so complex, you know, the number of dependencies in a given chain of technology keeps growing. So the hardest part now really is just keeping all the pieces humming and having enough capacity in the system to handle those spikes. Because the thing about live ops is, you know, we still see, you know, games that suddenly go from 0 to 3 million DAU in, you know, a few hours. And that, you know, no matter how good you are, no matter how much capacity you have, that's going to challenge any system. And so those are usually the systems I get called in for.
Super, thank you for that. Anyone else want to chime in with a real world example?
Sure. I have like Saumya, actually, I used to work on kind of hardcore Korean MMORPGs, the Wild West days of free-to-play. And we basically had to break the game using the tools that we had, so that we could offer like significant incentives to players who would spend. And we used to run events where if a player spent a certain amount, they would unlock an additional reward, a tiered spender. And basically there was one tier which was tied to what we called like a GM service. That meant the game master would actually perform some kind of operation, usually to like insert a gemstone on your sword that would make it more powerful, or that kind of thing. But we hadn't considered that actually amongst our GM services was also a wedding ceremony, which basically meant that a game master had to go into the game and perform a wedding ceremony, like typing out, like, do you take blah, blah, and, you know, throwing fireworks around and that kind of thing. And we suddenly realized that actually a lot of people just quite wanted to get married in game. So a ton of time was spent on just people having to go into game to constantly do wedding ceremonies instead of actually like driving revenue as we were hoping. So there you go, a slightly ridiculous example.
Amazing.
Nice engagement uptick.
Yeah, very literally.
I think one game, well, June's Journey I'm particularly proud of, just from the standpoint, we were talking earlier, the cultural shifts that are needed to move into a mindset that really desires live ops. And this is something that when I came to Wooga, it was just starting to develop, and the speed and momentum that we built up over time, you know, we had one sale that we could run in June's Journey for like the first almost 9 months of the product. Like, and it was not something that was very flexible. You had to keep all the currencies the same and these types of things. So now we have like event, you know, multiple events, different frameworks, multiple sales systems. these types of things that were developed internally. So really proud of the way that the team took that on, and it was very fun to develop these systems ourselves, especially with the depth of segmentation that we have, and just really understanding the player motivations, player journey, and just trying to essentially delight the players, because this is how you're going to get the best of all KPIs. So this has been a really great experience. Of course, in the past that had a few, but this is certainly a proud one. It had a recency bias as well.
One example of trends that we've been seeing is a shift. Live ops is all about sort of in-game messaging and CRM, obviously, but it's also got another personalization component, which is dynamically changing the game for the player under the surface. And I think that that is a really interesting area for the application of player management right now, whether it's changing the level of difficulty responding to the sort of the competency of the player, or adjusting the reward on a rewarded ad. I think that there's a big opportunity there to deploy some really nice best practices in player management to actually fit the game around the player. And that's something that we've seen quite a lot of our clients and the industry in general start to adopt. It's in its sort of first flushes, I would say, but it's definitely something that could be a focus over the next next year or two.
Mark, that was an excellent transition. In the few minutes that we have left, I'd love to take a few minutes to talk about what else you guys see in terms of where live ops is headed. Right, we've come such a long way in the industry. Where do you guys see the art of live ops headed in the future? Other trends or other things which you'd like to see happen? Ways that people are tending to their nightclub, if we're going to keep that analogy going.
Well, I remember, there was a session at GDC a couple years ago about machine learning in live ops or in games, and I think we had like one person who had one example, and it was still seen as this kind of cutting edge thing. And I think virtually everyone I talk to now is trying to do something with machine learning, whether it's churn prediction, a sort of simple example, to Mark's example he's giving us now, very advanced personalization where on the fly you're changing difficulty curves to optimize engagement or something like this. And I think we're just going to see that increasing. It's something we certainly are looking at, and I think that's the role of AI and machine learning and automating and optimizing live ops. I think is going to be one of the major trends for the next couple years.
Totally agree. To just go almost to the feature level, I think there's a couple trends that have certainly caught fire probably in the last year. Not to say that this is something new, akin to the battle pass. It's been around for quite some time. That caught fire. But really gamifying the purchase funnel, having that have features and events around just purchasing things. I've seen this quite heavily in a lot of different genres on mobile, and just like things as simple as purchase events and making that fun, whether that is IEP or just hard currency. And then also RNG. More and more genres are getting into using RNG in a positive, very fun way. I think there's a lot of psychological triggers that bring enjoyment to player bases. Of course, depending on how you use it, like definitely taking out the component that can be predatory, but as long as you make it fun for the players, this is something that more and more genres are starting to take in.
Do you want to define RNG for anyone who doesn't know that acronym?
Random number generation. So think of, oh boy, I want to stay away from saying the bad word of loot boxes, but and anytime you're playing WoW or Destiny, and you kill a baddie and they drop something, RNG in the background saying, oh, what do I drop here? And so even when you're chasing prizes and opening up chests, in doing things in the core loop. This I think is something that is becoming more and more widely used, even in genres that naturally it doesn't seem to fit. But I think there's some good synergies that are now, just through the sheer creativity of people, starting to show up and feel much better.
I think there's another couple of topics here as well that live ops is sort of starting to influence. One is some of the techniques that have been learned in live ops are feeding their way back into game experimentation, and level design and other topics like that. We could certainly apply some of the disciplines of live ops back into the development community. The other direction I see this going is that more and more, which was Saumya's point, was every player counts. We're not thinking of spenders and non-spenders anymore. We're thinking of blended economies. And we can see that the interaction between in-app purchase and ads is a really powerful one. Ads provoking a purchase, following a purchase with ads or not, as the case may be, really understanding the player experience for those blended economies. Because we've seen the component of the overall economy that ads generates is really now very important. And we see that sort of blending of the economies does add significantly to engagement as well. Something like a 6x was the last study that we did in terms of engagement, if you had the right blend of economy. So there's more complexity coming, I think, is what I'm saying. And we have the toolkits and we have the thinking and the cultures to take advantage of these now.
Yeah, I would just add to Patrick's point briefly, that actually there are a lot of genres which are now trying out techniques that wouldn't usually be accustomed in that genre. So you've got this kind of birth of like a hybrid casual mix where casual games are taking techniques from mid-core games and trying those out and trying to drive progression in different directions, but through live operations a lot of the time. And just a quick word regarding loot boxes as well, even though it seems to be like a taboo subject, I think it will continue to be a controversial thing in the coming years as governments take more of a stance on it. And I think actually moving to more retention-driven, like monetization mechanisms, like a battle pass, like is actually not a bad thing for the industry as a whole.
I'll throw one more trend in there, which is something that we're seeing at Microsoft, which is really interesting, is enterprise live ops. This idea of bringing live ops techniques from games into non-games. And I don't use the word gamification because I hate that word, but we're seeing, because I sit within a big company, we're seeing lots of other divisions kind of perking up and seeing what we're doing in games and trying to apply to things like hospitality. So I've talked to, for example, hotel chains or airlines who are looking at how do they take their traditional loyalty programs that are also very boring and sort of try to introduce notions from events and live ops into things like loyalty programs, which I find fascinating. And it'll be interesting to see if there's more of that kind of spillover happening as every business in the world is essentially transformed into a software-driven interactive application.
Excellent. So it looks like we are just about up on time. If there are no questions, I'll leave it to you guys to, if you want to say one final word. Otherwise, Oscar will take it away. Does anyone want to jump in with a final statement or perhaps a word of advice for developers who are tuning in right now, who are just now really thinking about live ops in a holistic way, in a serious way for the first time?
How much time do we have?
We have 1 minute.
Oh, we have 1 minute. Okay. So, I mean, just in brief, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, a lot of people have experience with these like very huge and cumbersome systems that have, data science, all this stuff behind it. But you can definitely go a very, very long way with just basic configs in an Excel sheet or in a Google sheet, and then get what we'd call like, very MacGyvery with it. Put the bubble gum in the paper clip and try and do this thing. So there's a lot of ways that you can just be creative, and you don't need these state-of-the-art systems. But if you can afford them, they are nice.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to say, if you're just tuning in, and no matter where you are as a company or as a studio, whether you're just coming up with a new game idea or you're in the middle of development, or you have a game that's been running for a number of years and you're thinking of adding or enhancing live ops. I think the basic advice is the same, which is that your core game needs to be engaging on its own, which is, on a session to session or day to day or a weekly or a monthly basis. If that's not in place, fix that. Then you can think about building your content cadence out and your feature release plan. And yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say anything that's new and breakthrough, at this point, but I cannot stress enough the importance of tools and fixing your tech debt. And if your game is at a stage when, it was built a really long time ago before live ops came into the picture, for example, and the architecture is just not there, it's imperative that you invest the time and resources to fix that, because it really is an investment in your game's future, for the next couple of years, 5 years, maybe even 10 years. So yeah, this is a drum that I will beat until, it breaks. So yeah, I know we're out of time, so I'm not going to say anymore.
Great. On that note, thank you everyone for tuning in. Thanks to all the panelists for an amazingly enlightening session. As I mentioned at the top, I'm sure we could be talking about this all day. If anyone listening right now is interested, please feel free to reach out to any of us. You can find us through all the Pocket Gamer literature and through the meeting systems. And with that, I'll hand it over to Oscar.
Thanks, Stephen. That was great. Really awesome stuff. And you guys have knocked out. I think what's interesting for me is I think we've got to the stage where people have seen that we've reached a threshold point in the acquisition side of the business. There's lots of effort and work and analysis and tools being put into recruiting new players. But I think what we're now seeing is that some people are really starting to understand that it needs expertise to actually understand the difference between making a game and running a game. And, I think, seeing people like, Nick and yourself and, what you guys at DECA are doing, and obviously what we're trying to do, I think there are starting to be an increasing number of people who are trying to bring that expertise to the teams that can't afford necessarily to hire the data analysts and the operations team and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, not everyone's got the kind of resources that Patrick has at Wooga, and that kind of awesome scale of game that you guys have got. And like I say, realizing that there are these tools out there, the way that Unity's acquired Mark's team, and also the Chili guys, and the way that you've got PlayFab and the Microsoft guys, there's this, for me, crystallization going on right now in live ops. And given I've been doing this for 22 years, it's about bloody time. So anyway, I think you guys have done an amazing job. I think one last thing I was going to just ask you, Stephen, is like, do you think that people really understand how profoundly impactful it is to change your mindset from releasing the game to live? I'd love to see what your view on that subject is.
I think that certainly some people here right now are thinking about things in the correct way, but as a lot of the other panelists alluded to, it requires sort of a huge fundamental shift for the industry as a whole. And it's good to see that with all of our successes here, the industry is moving in the right direction.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you very much. And I particularly like the way Kathy, Kristen, a previous speaker, talked about them. Yes, yeah, Kristen. Sorry, James. Yeah, my brain not working there. Too many people to read names for. Was talking about it as a nightclub. The idea of games that are nightclubs, they're not, they're not rock star performances in Wembley Stadium or wherever else. And I think that as soon as we make that mind shift, the better. Thank you, one and all. That was amazing.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Cheers.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.